So the last business idea that we want to talk about is this idea of market equilibrium. Market equilibrium is when the quantity produced is equal to the quantity demanded. So for example, the idea of why you might want to achieve market equilibrium, let's say that you are making some shirts. And let's say that you make 30 shirts. So these are how many that you make. How many of those shirts would you like to sell? Well, hopefully you would want to sell all 30 shirts, right? What you're looking for then is a particular price point at which you could charge that all 30 shirts that you made would sell. So here's what you would not want. Let's say that you make 30 shirts and you charge $100 per shirt. Let's say that that particular price causes you to only sell 15 shirts. Now you have 15 shirts that have not been sold. So they're just sitting around, eventually, potentially could go on clearance, but you could potentially end up with a lot of product on your hands that have not been sold. So what your goal is to charge a particular price, and choose what that price would be. That we call that the market equilibrium price, so that all of the product will sell. Something else that you don't want to do as well is that you don't want to underproduce. So let's say that I make 30 shirts and I'm charging, let's say, $10 each. And at that price, let's say that the demand for these shirts, let's say that there's 300 that are demanded at that particular price. Well, if I could potentially sell 300 shirts and I've only made 30, then I'm losing money that I could potentially be making. So our goal with this idea of market equilibrium is we're looking for that point at which the supply curve and the demand curve are exactly the same. That point at which they intersect. So we want to know what is that particular quantity and what is that particular price that should be made, that should be created there, so that the demand and the supply are basically balanced. So to find the market equilibrium quantity and price, we're going to set the demand curve, or the demand function, equal to the supply function. We're going to solve for x. This will be our equilibrium quantity. Once we have that equilibrium quantity, then we can plug that quantity into either of the functions to find our equilibrium price. All right. So here we have market equilibrium. The demand and supply functions for these particular tents are given by these two functions. And it says respectively, which means that the first one mentioned corresponds to the demand curve, and the supply curve will be the second one. So in order to find this market equilibrium, we're going to take the two functions and we're going to set them equal to each other. So we want to solve for x. I want to solve for that equilibrium quantity. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do, now that I've set the supply and demand functions equal to each other, is I'm going to multiply by 10 to get rid of all the decimals. Okay, now this is optional. You can solve by whatever means that you like to solve this quadratic equation. Okay, now that I've multiplied by 10, all of my decimals have gone away. And I'm going to solve this quadratic equation by bringing everything over to one side. So I'm going to choose to bring all the terms to the right side. So that means I'm going to add x squared, I'm going to add 10x, and subtract 400 from both sides of my equation. Keeping in mind that whatever we do to one side, we do the same thing to the other side of our equation. All of these terms drop out, and I'm left with 0 equals 2x squared plus 30x minus 200. And at this point, based upon your algebra skills from what you've learned in the past, you could solve this quadratic equation by the quadratic formula or by factoring. And I'm going to choose to solve by factoring. Before I do that, I noticed that all three of those terms are even terms. They're all divisible by 2. So I'm going to take one extra step and I'm going to divide everything on both sides by 2. And that gives me 0 equals x squared plus 15x minus 100. It gives us just a little bit easier of a function to solve. So now when I'm solving this equation, factoring will be the first thing that I would like to try. Of course, if you want to solve by quadratic formula or some other means, you can do that. The method that you use to solve is completely up to you. I'm going to solve by factoring, and so I have x and x. I have a negative and a positive value that I have to have for the numbers, and I'm thinking 20 and 5 would be my numbers, so that multiplies together to give me negative 100, adds up together to give me a positive 15. So I get two values. We get x is equal to 5 and x is equal to negative 20. Of course, we're talking about quantity, and x representing quantity. We can't have a negative quantity, so we're going to rule that out. And we're going to go with x is equal to 5. Alright, so this is our equilibrium quantity. I'm just going to call that E quantity for short, which really represents that I have 5,000 units. But before we do that, let's go and find the equilibrium price. So if our equilibrium quantity is given by x is equal to 5, then to find our equilibrium price, we're going to go back up here, and I'm going to plug in 5 in place of x in either equation. It does not matter. We should get the same p-value either way. So I'm going to plug a 5 into my second equation there. You could choose the top one. If you want to try the top one just to prove that you get the same number, that is a good idea. 25 times 0.1, I get 2.5 plus 10 plus 20, so I end up with 32.5. I'm going to go ahead and write that as a kind of as a dollar amount, $32.50. So our solution to this problem, our equilibrium quantity, is 5,000 units, and our equilibrium price then is $32.50. So what we're saying here is that if 5,000 units are produced, then you will be able to sell all of them. They will all be demanded, and this is the price that you should charge to where all 5,000 of those units would be sold.